Hi, I'm Bob Peters, and I'm here at Okahumpa, Eagles Area 4273 for a special dedication remembering and honoring September 11th. And our featured speaker is Mr. Gary Kadow, Chaplain Kadow from September 11th. He'll talk all about September 11th and what's going on with Project SOS. Thank you.
We want to welcome everybody. We are glad to have you here.
Hold it on. Right, wait. Forward, mark. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Okay, well, I want to give a special thanks to Steve Jamison for singing the song for us. That's awesome.
Yeah, wow. Bravo.
Also, special thanks for Mr. Randy for playing the horn. Thank you, sir. That's really good for where we are in this little small town in this little small state. But I want to give thanks to that to begin with. Now we would like to introduce some of our special guests. We have Deputy Holden here from the Sheriff's Department representing Mr. Grinnell.
Captain?
We have another special guest, family, Gold Star family. Where did they go? There's David and Sadie Bach.
And they are Eagle members.
They have just recently became Eagle members. Thank you. We're gonna work together and do good things in this world. Also, Mr. Ike. Mr. Ike is a Desert Storm. He's a survivor of Desert Storm. He usually has his assistant with him, Sherry. Is she here with you today? Yeah, there we go. All right.
Kim is
He
here.
has his assistant, Sherry, right?
That's correct. And he just came back, by the way. The Eagles helped sponsor Ike, Glenn Ike Fritz, who's a great guy. He not only does the alternative sports, competes all over the country, he mentors young wounded veterans. I take my hat off to you, brother. So, I've known Mr. Kadow for quite a while. We are dear friends, both Air Force veterans, both Vietnam veterans. I met him several years ago. My wife and I were taking care of my mom. There was a little lady, had a wheelchair. She passed. I saw a little article in the newspaper about one by one looking for wheelchairs. And that story we'll talk a little later, okay? Because we want to talk about what happened after September 11th and your project, SOS. But right now, we want to talk about September 11th because you were there. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, after the Air Force, we got involved with government things, and what led you to becoming part of September 11th? How did that happen?
Golly, that was a long road. When I got out of the service, I went to work for the federal government. I worked for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. That was my first official job. And kind of worked my way up. I was up in New York State, born and raised in Buffalo, New York. Snow country.
We can sit out there, that way we can see.
Right?
Sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, I applied to the government, got a position with them in Buffalo, and ended up being the chief administrator for New York State for HUD. So I was kind of a busy guy traveling all around. That went on for about 18 years. And then after that, I was asked to go to Washington, D.C., better known as Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac. And I spent 4 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the administration. At that time, I actually worked for two administrations. I worked for the Bush administration and the Clinton administration, so I kind of got a flavor for both. When I finished with the Secretary and in HUD, I was then asked to go over to the White House, and I worked there as a special assistant to the president for 4 years. So I really got an education over there. Long and the short of it is, when that was done, it was time to retire. So on September 10th, 1998, I actually retired from federal service. I thought I could enjoy just sitting around and playing golf and having a good time, but I'm afraid that wasn't in my makeup. So the long and the short of that was, I volunteered, and I went to the American Red Cross, and I said, hey, look, give me something to do. I'll hand out cookies, juice, whatever you want. Well, let me know. And they said, great. Give me a resume, let us know a little bit about you. We'll see what we got. Well, about 48 hours later, I got a call from Washington again. And they said, would you be interested in becoming a government liaison officer for the National Disaster Response Team out of Washington? And what that meant was, anytime there was a disaster anywhere in the country or our territories, I would get a call. And I had to have a bag packed and ready to go. And my job, very simply, was to coordinate all of the effort as far as supplying what was needed to get the job done for federal, state, county, local, and so forth, and coordinate them, which is a little like herding cats. But I was able to do it, and I did enjoy it. I would be away for sometimes 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time, which my wife got used to. And then finally, on Tuesday, September 11th, early in the morning, I was up, my usual routine, making coffee. My wife called and said, do you have the TV on? And I said, no, not yet. She said, put it on right now. So I clicked it on, and sure enough, I see this plane going into one of the towers. Now, I knew him well because I used to go down there once a month for meetings. And I thought it was a Steven Spielberg trailer for a movie or something at that point because they didn't hear the audio. And as I stood there, I saw the other plane coming in, and I knew it was real. So I listened as much as I could. Within 30 minutes, I got that call that I dreaded, saying, you need to report. And I said, well, I'm already set. I've got everything I need. I'm heading to the Pentagon. And they said, the Pentagon? And I said, yeah, I have a niece and a nephew who are right at the windows where that nose of that plane went through. That's their office. And I think we lost them. So I'm heading down there. My sister's there and so forth. Well, the bottom line was God was gracious to them, and they had their offices remodeled. They hadn't put in the new telephones yet. They were supposed to go in on September 10th, 2001. So they delayed it a week, and they were on the other side of the Pentagon. And they said, you wouldn't go anyway because you're too involved emotionally. You're heading for New York, you're gonna be meeting with the governor in Albany, there's a bunker. I don't know anybody from New York here, but if you're familiar with it, there's a bunker about 350 feet underground at the State University of New York in Albany, which is a self-contained city, literally. It exists there for up to a year. And that's where everybody goes when something happens, all the coordination's from there. So within 20 minutes, I had a New York State Trooper at my door and another one in the back car, and then they escorted me all the way to Albany. I think we made it in about 2.5 hours. Scared the bejesus out of me. Those guys really travel fast. And I got there, and the rest is history. I met with the governor, I got my assignments, and that's how I ended up at 9/11. As simple as that. Just fate, I guess.
You know, you and I have chatted about this event before. You know, we're close friends, and I've interviewed you before. But tell everybody your reaction when you got there on September 11th. What did you expect to see, and what did you see, and how did it affect you?
Well, when I initially got there, and I reported to what we affectionately called the bunker, the controlled bunker, what I found out was all of the communications out of New York mainly came from a gigantic antenna right on top of one of the towers. Well, they were no more. So we had 4 gigantic light screens in front of us. We had no idea what was truly going on down there. Everything was shut down, nothing was in the air, nothing was traveling. And when I met with Governor Pataki at that time, George Pataki, he said, look, I need somebody down there knows what they're doing. And he said, I know you've worked a lot of disasters. Would you go down and do an assessment of what the needs are? So I said, sure, fine. So they made arrangements to get me down there. I did manage to get on a train from Albany all the way down to Penn Station. NYPD was there. Anybody from NYPD? No? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, the first time in the back of an NYPD squad car in the cage is a true experience. I got about this much room, and I'm jammed in there, and off we went. They got me at Penn Station. We drove through the carnage, we drove through the fire and the smoke and the people coming this way while we were going that way. And I finally got in there, and I had my Red Cross garb on and everything that I normally needed at that time, my credentials from the governor and all that. Got out of the car, they greeted me, and we started walking back in to where the battalion, I'm gonna get the names wrong because I'm not a firefighter. I believe it was the battalion commander who was in charge at the time. They had set up back by one of the towers to come down as close as they could get. It was still burning, still smoking, still explosions going on. It was just a picture of hell. I mean, if you can imagine what hell was like, believe me, that is exactly what hell must be like, because the ground as you walk would split open. There would be an air pocket. When the air got in, the flames would ignite and they would blow out of the ground. So about every 15, 20 feet, there'd be a crack and flame shooting out. And you're walking through this, wondering if you're gonna be on one of those. But I walked back in through ashes well above my knees, just a gray ash. And I remember when I was walking back in with one of the other firemen, I said, where's all the people? I said, my Lord, I said, I used to come down, there's 30,000 people in these towers. Where is everybody? There wasn't a soul to be seen. And he said, they're right here, pal. He said, we're walking through. This is all that's left. And then it hit me. What devastation. Everything that was there, that was present, was just turned to ash or melted away. And I got back in there and I talked to the battalion commander and I said, the governor sent me. I need to know what it is you have to have right now in order to make things happen down here. And he said, it's pretty simple. He said, I need a chaplain. That's not what I expected to hear. Normally we need Scott air packs, we need this, we need that. He goes through a long laundry list of all the essential items. But he looked me in the eye and he said, I need a chaplain. I said, what am I missing? And he said, Father McCall. Father Michael, they call him Michael. Michael Drive is actually was McCall. And I had gone to seminary, taken some classes with him, so I knew him well. Great man. He was one of the few that could actually sit down with the firefighters and the police and get them to play nice. He was pretty good. It was amazing. He was the first one to die on 9/11 in the tower. He is death certificate number 1. And when they lost him, it was devastating to all the people that were down there. So when I looked him in the eye and I said, I don't get it, and he explained it to me, he said, I need a chaplain. And I said, well, I'm a chaplain. That's what I do. Now, that was a little confusing because I'm in Red Cross clothes, and prior to that, they knew I was a federal officer. But I had gone to seminary on my own through my church for many, many years. And I had trained to deal with just these kind of things as a chaplain. So I had the experience. I did it at night, I did it on weekends, so it was kind of strange. I looked like this at night and on weekends, going to people, taking communion, doing weddings and funerals and baptisms and you name it. And then during the day, I was a federal officer and I was dressed in a coat and tie with a sidearm with handcuffs and the whole 9 yards. So it was a real controversy when people saw that. But when he told me that, he saw the bewildered look on my face and he said, let me tell you something. He said, I have to send my people into that pit of hell. And I know some of them are not coming out again. And if you think I'm gonna send them into there without at least affording them the sacraments of the church before they go in, you're crazy. And boy, that hit me. I welled up, kind of like I'm doing now. And I thought about it. And I said, okay, I'm here. You tell me what you need, but I have to call the government. I have to find out, let him know what I'm doing. So I did immediately. I called. I had a cell phone. And I got him on the line, and I said, look, I'm down here. I'm talking to Commander so-and-so. Give him the name, send my book somewhere. And I said, I would like to stay here. They need a chaplain. They have nobody. And we have literally hundreds and hundreds going down into that pit, some 350 feet, that we know are probably not coming out again. And he said, I understand, I sympathize, but the answer is no. And I need you back here. He said, I want you back in Albany. Do what I asked you to do, bring the information back. And that just hit me between the eyes. But when I thought about it, I was the only person there in a room full of 80 people, all the heads of all the different agencies, that actually knew that particular job. There was nobody to back me up on it. So I understood. And I said to him, do you care what I do in my own time? He said, I don't care what you do in your own time. I go to Disneyland for all I care. And I said, great. And I said, I'll be back shortly. So I did go back. I did my reports. I worked 8 hours a day underground. When I was done, I would come out. I would get on that same train. I'd call my friends at NYPD. They'd pick me up. Only now I'm changing from a suit sometimes, other times work clothes into my collar. And I had my field communion kit with me, which I always took to disasters. And I would begin work down there. I set up a small chapel. If you're familiar with the towers down there, there was a Burger King right on the corner of the vestry area. It was a 3-level. It got absolutely demolished and blown out. So that became our chapel. On the first floor, we would counsel and have a chapel. The second floor would be sleep. The third floor would be cell phones where they could call their loved ones and let them know how they were doing. Now, you might also wonder how we manned something like that on just one person. When I arrived, it was total chaos. When you got down into what they call the hot zone, there was no security, there were no fences. People walked in and out that lived in the neighborhood. Young kids were walking in who were college kids, and they saw me and they came over and they said, look, we got to do something. Give us something to do. We can't just stand here and watch this. And I said, well, I'm going to try and open up a chapel. I'm going to try and get some food and some hot food and some beverages to the folks that are working here. And you might think that's strange because we have the Red Cross, we have the Salvation Army, we have all these different agencies, which are wonderful. But they were 13 blocks away. They couldn't come into the hot zone. It was far too dangerous. And when you're down there trying to find someone who is your brother or your sister, a firefighter, a police officer, a port authority, whoever, a civilian, children. There were children involved. We don't talk about that, but a lot of children were with us that day. We're on tours. When you're doing that, you don't just stop and go get a sandwich. You keep working. You never stop. So we needed food right there. It would take 5 minutes to grab something to eat and go back in again. And the example of this was I saw a firefighter, and I'll never forget this young man. They could work 24 hours in the debris pile, and they would dig through concrete with their hands. They wore leather gloves. But within half a day, those gloves were totally destroyed. The fingers are out of them because there's glass and there's steel embedded in the concrete when the towers came down. And he actually had his fingertips amputated right there on the site. And they said, you are out of here. Go. And he did. He left the south tower. He put a new pair of gloves over the bandages. He went to the north tower and he signed it and worked for the 24 hours. That's what you did. It never left. Nobody left that I knew of. And the sacrifices that were made, the work that was done, was miraculous. I saw so many miracles take place there. It was just incredible. And and I'm rambling on, so you stop me.
Yeah, you are. I was wondering why I was standing here for
Yeah.
a minute. Sorry about that.
I told you, we're good friends. But when he went there, what he didn't mention was the fact that the chaplain was there was Catholic, and he's Episcopalian. So he had to call his church and the Catholic church, and they both said, do what you gotta do. And he did what he had to do. But when you first came there too, tell them a little bit about the zones and that Burger King and the kids. I mean, that part I always, these kids, all different denominations and religions, what have you. Yeah. Well, I touched a little bit about it. There's a little more to the story. As I said, 13 blocks away there was food, hot food available, and so forth. But very few were going down to get it. So the little Burger King that we set up got to be quite the gathering place. And everybody came in there, and we helped everybody we could. But that meant going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it was always busy. We didn't have that kind of staff. But these young kids that came in, these college kids, they lived in the immediate neighborhood. When they asked for something to do, and I told them, you can help me with that, trying to get that set up. Not only did they do that, they took their first semester tuition money. Again, it's early September, they hadn't quite paid it yet. They took their tuition money, they went, they bought food, they bought beverages, they bought everything we need using their own money, and they brought it back. And that's how the facility got started, and that's how we started taking care. I don't believe they ever got credit for it, to be honest with you. I certainly gave them credit. But they were miraculous, and each one of them called 2 friends. And then they called 2 friends. So before we knew it, we had a full staff around the clock of these young people coming in there, working so energetic, so excited. They did a miraculous job. And much to my pleasure, when it was done and I got to talk to them, and I still had some communication with them, although they're much older now, as am I. 3 of them went to seminary and became ministers. 1 young lady and 2 of the guys, which I thought was wonderful. What a great tribute. And it was all due to 9/11. So it was quite interesting. As I said, there was actually 3 zones. It was the hot zone where we were, there was the warm zone, and then the cool zone, we call it. The cool zone was pretty much safe. Now, you're sitting here too, and you're reading the paper, you're seeing stuff on TV, and it kind of looks like that they're right there. Well, truthfully, they weren't allowed in. Nobody was allowed in unless you were a first responder and you had a specific responsibility. So a lot of the reports that you got were shot with cameras with 600mm lenses from 5 blocks away and done interviews on the street with people that were never there. So a lot of the stuff we were reading in the paper, we just shake our heads and say, wow, where are they getting this from? But the fact is, what actually took place there was truly frightening. Can I talk about the dogs a little bit? No,
I wish you would, Tatter.
yeah, oh yeah, that was like, I was picking on me because when we were there, the buildings that did remain standing, there weren't many. And if you can picture 16 football fields all put together, that was the size of the World Trade Center complex. It was huge. There were 24 buildings that made up that complex, most of which were completely demolished. The steel was melted from the heat of the jet fuel and just bent. I call it spaghetti steel because it looked like something just had been bent. And that's how all the buildings were there. So as we were there, the other buildings now could get the wind. They weren't protected by the Trade Center, but they were weakened. So the glass was blowing out of the windows in these 80-story buildings, raining down on us. Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not the trimmest, most fit guy in the whole world. But when that would happen, they would blow a steam whistle, an old steam whistle. And that meant get out of that area, glass is coming down. And you would run down towards the harbor. It was a really safe place you could go. Well, I don't run quite so fast. So what would happen is the minute that blast would go off in the steam, there were 2 firemen that were assigned to me. I actually had my own fireman down there. It was pretty cool. They would come up from behind when I least expected it, throw their arms underneath mine, pick me up off the ground, and run like that. That was their job. That's what they got me for. So they would carry me all the way down to the harbor. Hey, Potter, okay? Yeah, Wes, thanks. Are you sure, Potter? If you're all right, Potter? I was never Potter. I was Potter. So I was Potter for quite a while. But we got the biggest kick out of that, but they were always there. It was absolutely amazing. So that's.
But they didn't call you that because of, you being a little obese
No,
No, they called him that because they didn't say father, it's the New York accent, it was father. And you had a name tag made up, right?
yeah, I did. They actually gave me the where it says Chaplain here. I had one from 9/11, and it's in what I call my memory box, which I have a lot of stuff in. And that was the title that they put on it. They put Father Gary. So whenever they needed me, and they needed me more often than I care to think, that was it. We're gonna call Father Gary. And I held services down in the ground. You wouldn't see me on the surface. I was down about 150 feet. There was a path that a bobcat made going down. And when I say down, I'm talking way, way down. And people didn't realize too, there was also a wall in there that held back the Hudson River. And when the flames and everything was burning underneath the ground, the water was breaking through and coming in. And literally, in certain spots, it became a rolling boil. You know, it was like they had a pot of water on the stove. And the one thing I remember vividly, there were two guys, you'll see them in the video, sitting there with their hard hats on. The utility workers were all over down there. And these are people never get credit. The iron workers, the truck drivers, the construction people, the civilians who came in. The guys, somebody's got to turn off the gas. Somebody's got to take care of power, right? So the firemen don't get injured, and the rescue workers don't get injured. These two guys did that. That was their job. And I watched them rappel down maybe 120, 150 feet through this hole, down where the fires were burning, water underneath, and they're both standing on a steel I-beam trying to get in to turn off the main valve area for the gas. Well, as they're down there, the rope catches fire. And it burns, starts burning its way up like a movie. And they're standing on this beam, and they had to stay there for about 15 minutes until they could get new lines down to them. Meanwhile, as you could look down, the water underneath them was like a pot on a stove. Had they fallen, just the falling, the water would have. And yet, they did it, and they did it time and time again. The things that were done there were incredible. The dogs, I don't know how many owns dogs here, but if you do, boy, I'll tell you, the animals that we had there, particularly, I didn't like the term, they call them cadaver dogs, but again, we were there to rescue. Okay? The first 3 days was a rescue effort. The saddest day of our lives was the end of the third day, when they stood up and they declared it a recovery effort. There was no one left to be found alive. That's what they determined. That broke our hearts. But you keep going. But the dogs would go in anyway, run through the debris pile, I mean fast. And again, if you recall, the steel, the glass that's embedded in the concrete, they're running through and they're tearing the pads of their feet to shreds. First day alone, we lost 2 dogs that bled out, just running through the debris pile, which was heartbreaking. And one young reporter got the story and ran an ad in the New York paper talking about these 2 dogs. Well, we got a call that night from a lady, and I'll never forget her name, but Ruth Sisson. She was 82 years old. She called and she says, I got some Velcro and I got some corduroy and I got a hell of a sewing machine. She said, I'm going to take care of that problem for you. And I said, God bless you, good for you. I said, here's where I am, here's how you can get me. Tell them this, this, and that, and I'll let you through the line to meet with me. And she said, okay, very good, butter. Jersey. So sure enough, the next morning, we got 250 pair of red booties with Velcro on them that we could put on the dogs. And I'll tell you, they were great. When you watch this, you'll see one of the German Shepherds has a pair of those on. But it saved the animals. I mean, what a clever thing to do, and what a gracious thing to do. Saw that time and time again. And I mentioned miracles to you too. Just kidding. I'm on a roll. There's a church down there named Trinity Church. Beautiful old church. And when I say old, I'm talking about our forefathers went to church. Washington went there. Jefferson, a bunch of people went there that you would know. The bottom line is, it had beautiful stained glass windows, absolutely gorgeous. And all around the church, back in those days, they had cemeteries. And they had the cemetery stones probably this high, maybe a good 10 inches thick, some of them, granite, heavy duty. When the towers came down, the impact was so great, so huge. It was like a bomb, it looked like a nuclear bomb going on. And it sheared off these stones, just like you took a cutter and just cut them off. And they're all laying flat, all around the church. And as I walked through there, and I looked up at the windows, the stained glass windows, not one single window had a crack. Not a break, not a hole, nothing. It was if God took his hands and just put it over the church and said, not today. You take those stones, but you're not taking this church. And it was flawless and it was amazing. So I got to see a lot of things. Fireman's Cross was also part of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, tell them about you were talking a little bit about the Burger King and the kids.
Yeah.
And this was like, one thing you have to remember, like he said, there's a hot zone, a cool zone, and, it's okay zone. But they were right in the middle, and,
They were in the middle of it,
yeah, what happened? Didn't they try to throw them out?
yeah. Yeah, well, it's the wisdom of our government again. And now that I don't work for them, I can tell you the truth. They didn't have a clue what was going on. They really didn't. The people that were there, that's who made it happen, folks. They have no illusions about that. These young kids, as I said, they worked around the clock. The firemen loved them. Everybody there, every first responder that was there loved them because they took care of them. And they asked for nothing in return. And they worked so hard. Well, after about 2 weeks, government was actively involved. Everybody had to have credentials. They all had to have special badges with special coding and special this and special that, or you couldn't get in there. Well, all of a sudden, they came back to our kids. There were some, maybe 32, I think, at that point. And they said, "You don't have badges." And they said, "No, we work here." "Not anymore, you don't." "Out." And they threw them out. Well, I heard about it. And when I went back to the governor, I told him, he said, "Over here." He said, "You're with the Red Cross, talk to the Red Cross." I said, "Okay." So I called the head of it at that time and told her, I said, "Look, here's what's happening." I said, "These kids need to get credentialed." They said an agency, just take them on, back them, give them an ID, and they can stay. And they wouldn't do it. And he said, "We're different than other agencies. We're the only agency in the United States that's actually under the authority of the Congress." And if you look, it's true. And there's nothing against the Red Cross, they do great jobs. But in this case, they said, nothing we can do. They let it go. So I got a guy sitting next to me. His last name was Minor. I can't remember his first name, or something like that. And he was a major with the Salvation Army. So I called him Major Minor. Made sense to me. So I turned to Major Minor. I said, "Look, I'm really up against the wall. Can you help? Here's my kids. This is who they are. Here's the list. Here's the social security. Here's all their information. I can't get them credentialed through the American Red Cross. Anything you can do?" He goes, "Got it." Made one phone call. Next thing we know, next morning, everybody's credentialed. They all got IDs. They're all getting a picture taken, and they're back on the job. They're doing it again. So people stepped up to the plate. It was so cool. The thing that was not so cool, I had a radio with me all the time, constantly. I didn't carry that when I was there. And if they found someone, or they found remains, I would get a call. Now, the rule of thumb was very simple. If it was a firefighter, firefighters went in. They took care of their own. They brought them out. If they were not intact, which was the case with most, they were placed in a body bag. I would get a phone call. I would go down there, they escort me down. I'd have to wear an air pack because the air was very well with her, especially that fireman, and perform the sacrament of last rites. Sometimes just anointing the outside of the body bag because you couldn't on the inside, there was nothing right there. And every time something was found, it had to be GPS, placed separate in a bag, identified, and turned in. So there were literally about 45,000 bags like that. The very first day I ordered over 22,000 body bags. I had to go back and order 30,000 more within 3 days. That's how many we used. That didn't make the paper either. But I made that trip many, many times. And again, each took care of their own. Firefighters took care of their own. Police, Port Authority, civilian, even medical were down there. And they did the same thing. So that was probably the hardest part for me, was to go down there. I do remember the one day that I got a call from some of the firefighters, and they said, "Father, you gotta come down here, you gotta see this." And I'm thinking, okay, now what do we got going? And I said, "All right, where do I meet you?" "Well, we'll meet you up top, we'll walk you down in." I said, "Okay." So I went down, and I'm thinking it's a recovery of some kind. And they had broken through into, I guess the easiest term is a cabin. And at this point, we were probably at our lowest point. We knew it was not a rescue, it was just a recovery. No one was coming out. The armory was filled with families bringing in toothbrushes and combs and things like that, not knowing why. It was for DNA, so we could identify their loved ones, because there was nothing left. But I went down expecting the worst, and they said, we just broke through this wall area, and you gotta see this. And I went through, and it was like walking into an amphitheater, almost like a dome inside. And all the debris was all around, but there was this hollow area, and there were breaks in the debris, and it was actually a sunny day, it was a blue sky day. And the light was coming through probably 12, 13 different areas, and it all focused on one thing right in the center, and it was a cross. They called it the Fireman's Cross. You can see it in pictures. It was steel high beams that had been severed. You can see that they were cut absolutely perfectly in the form of a cross. And there it stood. And 12 lights hit on it, just like that. And I thought, that's the sign. That's what we're waiting for. And from that point on, the rest is history. We did our job. It took a long time. We had a rougher. We were the ones on Staten Island. That was the morgue. They had a rougher. But everybody stood together. And I will say this. Anybody here from New York, Jersey area? God bless you guys. Buffalo? Me too, man. Chico, that a girl. They threw him out. But I will admit, for years and years and years, I always thought New Yorkers were loose. They didn't bother with it. They wouldn't help you. They wouldn't give you directions. They weren't real friendly. You know, the old kind of thing. You know, we can't be bothered. Well, I guess somebody else. Kind of thing. But oh, right there, yes, sir. Right. Problem. But what I learned in New York, 9/11, they are the warmest, kindest, friendliest people I've ever met in my life. There wasn't a time when I left that site, and when I left, I was a mess. I'm dressed like this, but I'm covered in ash, and I've got a gas filtration mask hanging down with canisters on it, and I'm dirty, and I probably stunk. Well, no, I didn't notice, but everybody stunk. But the long and the short of it is, I couldn't walk one city block without 5 people walk up and say, if I had a G today, you have breakfast, you have lunch, did you have dinner? Can I get you a cup of coffee? Anything. And that happened constantly. That's just how it was. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Are you going somewhere? I got to go to the Letterman show. I had one day off, and I went down to the Letterman show. And I'm standing in line, and again, I look like a bum, dirty, and I still got all my garb on. I had nothing to wear to change. So while I'm in line with these hundreds of people waiting to get into the show to get a decent seat, the girl walks over and she said, Father, where have you been? And I said, 9/11, I'm down in the pit. She says, come with me. So they took me in a line, they walked me over. She says, you wait right here, someone's gonna come get you. And I said, well, they're gonna take me to jail. What are you gonna do? And sure enough, the door opened, and out is one of the staff. And he says, come with us. And they sat me right up front, and I got to watch the show, and he recognized and said, thank you. And Paul, the guitar player, he's playing, and it gets all done. And I'll tell you what, he could fire a guitar pick like that. An expert could fire a rifle. I'm in the front row here in the back of this room.
Microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sitting in front. He's probably as far away as the back of this room while he's playing. And he takes that pick, he goes, hey, this is for you, Father, and he goes, and he flips it, and boom, right there, I got it. The first thing I ever caught in my life was a baseball. But it was a magnificent day, it was a wonderful day. The other thing that I was really impressed, and again, I tried to put the more joyful things in my book, because it was enough sadness published. So I wrote about the miracles, and I wrote about the good things. But the long and the short of it is, we had a huge funeral service. It was at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I think a lot of you may remember that. And I got a ride down from 2 state troopers who didn't know New York at all. So it took us an hour to get from the financial district to St. Patrick's, right? They were from upstate New York. They knew more than I did. And we got to St. Patrick's, and I walked in. Again, typical dirty looking with the gas thing and all. And I'm standing way off to the side, because I didn't have a ticket. This was all the big VIPs there, right? Cardinal is doing the whole mass, big stuff. So I'm off to the side, and I'm hoping I don't get thrown out, and I see, what's it? Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani.
That's why I'm here.
Thank you, that's why I'm my back. Rudy Giuliani sitting there with all of his security people and all that around, right in front of the row, of course, where else, right? And I keep seeing him looking over, looking over, and I'm like, oh, I'm not long for this place, I'm gonna be out here in a heartbeat. And finally, one of the security guys gets up, and he walks over to me, and he walks right up to me, I'm going, I know, I shouldn't be here, sorry about that, but I felt about the So, oh, no, he said, why don't you come over? Okay, so we walk over, and he's sitting there, and he introduced himself like I didn't know. And he turns around to, I think it was his executive staff or whatever, the guy right next to him. And he said, give this man your seat. And the guy got up and he moved to the next row. There I sat. And I thought, that was cool. That was really class act. So we've been friends for years and years and years. And, I guess.
You know, there's a lot of things you could talk about. But there's one thing you used to, yeah, you're right, you know, and I'm gonna have a comment on that later, but there's one funny part you thought was really funny. You said, you talked about it before about finding someone. You know what I mean? Help me. In a window? In a window?
Yeah. Well, strange things happen when you're in that type of environment. But as I mentioned before, the impact of the towers going down were tremendous. Like the biggest bomb you could imagine going on. It literally, how do I put it technically? It not only killed people, but it blew them through the air, sometimes as far as 13, 14 blocks away. Literally. So it was not unusual to get a phone call to someone say, look, I was just out on a roof of my apartment building and you guys better come down here. And there would be a body or a body part. How it is. So finally, one of the ladies comes back and says, look, we got a report, there's a body hanging out of a window about 13 blocks down. We can see it. We need to go recover and bring it back. And I said, yeah, fine, whatever. And off they went. And I'm waiting. Nobody wanted me there to receive it when it came back. And in come some of the firemen, I think a couple of the police were there, and they're carrying this person. Only it isn't a person. It's a sculpture. If you've ever gone to the World Trade Center before it got destroyed, there was a bench right out in front by the reflection pool. Okay, and they had a sculpture on there, a guy sitting there with a briefcase. Well, when the tower came down, it ripped that right off the bench, broke the poles, sailed it 13 blocks away and put it right through a window. And that's what we saw sticking out. We saw the torso of his man hanging out the window, and they carried it back. So what do you do when that happens? You make a memorial out of it, right? Come on. So we set it up in our staging area, and from that point on, people put flags on it, they'd put patches on it, they would write poems, they would leave letters, you will also see that in the movie. And that kind of, again, was one of the times that made you smile, there weren't a whole lot. But you needed those times. So it was a tremendous experience. It changed my life forever. In the beginning, I openly admit, it destroyed me mentally. Now I'm trained to do these things. I went for a long time and took specialized classes, how to deal with the emotions, how to deal with death, that kind of thing. When I came home, I needed to get away. I just wanted to get away from everybody. So my wife and I got a plane ticket. We went out to South Utah. We went way, way back in the Canyonlands in Moab and just stayed there for like 3 weeks because it just weighed so heavy on me. And it helped a little, but when I came home, for about 3 months, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would be screaming, or I would be crying, or I would just be sweating like mad and shaking. And it was 9/11. It kept coming back. You and I know PTSD, right? I mean, classic case of PTSD. And that went on to the point where my wife finally came back and said, I can't do this anymore. I can't take this. I can't see you like this. So I called across counseling, went to counseling. They sat and talked to me and they said, well, what'd you go through? What'd you see? And I told them. And it's like, whoa, I don't think we can help you. You need somebody a little more specialized. So they sent me to another counselor, one of their senior counselors, right? Right out of DC. They couldn't do anything. It'll happen because we don't get help on PTSD at all. And we're both the counselors. So the long and the short of it is, I finally talked to a fireman, a Buffalo friend of mine. And he said, you know, he said, there's a guy in Williamsville, you would know where this is, and he is what they call an extreme trauma counselor. He deals with police officers that had to take a life, firefighters, you know, I've had children that died in our and stuff like that. And why don't you give him a call, see what he will do. So I checked it out first, and yeah, this guy was big time, $150 an hour. Back then, that was, well, it still is a lot of money. Back then it was huge, but even now it's, I mean, and I thought, well, maybe a couple hours I could do. And I called him and I told him a little bit of the story. And he said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna come in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every week. And I said, for how long? He goes, until you're fine, until you're back, until you're well. And I thought, ka-ching, 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 right? And I said, I can't afford that. And he goes, did I ask you for money? I said, no. He said, then don't assume. I don't want any money from you, I just want to meet you. And sure enough, I went in and I met with this guy after probably the better part of 6 months. We got to the point where he said, here's what I think the problem is. He said, you took pictures when you were there, right? And I said, yeah, with permission, of course. And he said, and you kept a journal every day, a diary. And I said, I did. I didn't want to forget what I was feeling, what I saw, thus the book. My intention was to write it all down, put the pictures in there, and leave it for my grandchildren. We all like to leave our grandchildren something to remember us by. And that was mine. And he said, what you're doing is selfish. He said, you can leave it for your grandchildren, fine. But you need to share it with someone else. You need to tell them what it was really like down there, what you really went through, so they can understand. And he said, by not doing that, he said, you're being selfish. And I thought, whoa, never dawned on me. And I said, well, you know, that's all well and good. And you can say, put it in a book. And he said, I can't write a book. And he said, I'm not a writer like that. I've done technical stuff for the government, never even done a book. And he said, I got a friend. And it turned out his friend and mine were the same. It was a lawyer that I had, Steve, a good friend of mine. And he said, hey, I can write. He said, if you can talk, I can write. So we spent literally 2 months talking to the recorder to ask questions I'd answered. And we finally put the book together and we got it out. Stephen Fox was his name, wonderful man. And that was it. And when that went out, my idea was to dedicate it to all those who lost their lives and to my family who put up with all of this. And every penny that we got from that went to the museum, 9/11 Museum in New York. We managed to raise almost $250,000 in selling those books. And I had people from all over the United States. There are no more. You can't buy it now in the new standard bookstores. But well, I have my own. I'm allowed so many, and I still have a couple of cases, but you know, that's it. But everything that went from that, it cost about $20 to get the thing done. All that goes to them. Now we have supplied enough that they're doing very, very well. I've been there. I actually lectured there for a week. They invited me to come down. So now it's going to a different charity. One of the things I did when I came back, and in honor of my son who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and numerous other places, I started a charity called Project SOS, Support Our Soldiers. The Eagles know it well. They have supported us tremendously throughout the years. We not only help our homeless veterans who are living in the forest, and I'm talking the true homeless veterans sleeping on the ground under tarps and tents, who struggle with PTSD every day, who often don't have enough to eat, enough to wear, don't stay warm in the wintertime. We should provide everything that we can, including medical and dental, because the government wasn't giving it to them. And I fought with them, now they're getting it now. But the bottom line is, that's where everything goes now from the books. So I did bring some today. I'm not talking books. You don't have to buy one. I'm just happy to see your faces here that you'll remember. But if you do, I'll be happy to sign it for you. And again, that's where we'll go. So, Bobby.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about Project SOS, what he's doing. Like I said, I met him about 10 years ago with that little wheelchair. That went over to Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
That was for what they call the crawling ones, because the crawling children. And our rangers over there had built a wheelchair out of plywood and bicycle parts. And they got a hold of this guy. And they got wheelchairs. I used to do a show at the city of Leesburg, and we did an episode with them about SOS. 2 weeks later, we had about 250 chairs.
Oh, at least, yeah. By the time we're done, we have over 480 chairs.
People listened. And after that, you got medical supplies. You started clinics over there. I've introduced you to a dear friend of ours, Pastor Chris Ward. And you and I and he, we'd all go into the forest, cook dinner. My beautiful wife's over here somewhere, hiding. She went with me. There she is. Yep.
Raise
But
your hand in,
I
ladies.
used to tell everybody my wife is 7 feet tall, but she's not.
There she is, yeah. You can barely see her right out between your shoulders.
That's my daughter on the other side. But anyway, we all went out there together. We brought Thanksgiving dinner out to the homeless. And you've done so much. We used to pick up wheelchairs, motorized chairs, and now you also do the education for kids.
Oh, that's going great.
Yeah, and we sponsor some of them right here.
You have 4 children.
You're gonna let me know how that made out.
I've got all their grade reports.
Because that guy wants to know. But yeah, you've done so much, you know, and I'm proud to call you my friend, and I'm proud to have gone with you and done a lot of this stuff.
Sounds like a mutual admiration society. I could not have done it without you.
I don't know, but
And
you
your
know,
show at that time, that made the difference too.
there's one thing you didn't mention.
What's that?
Way at the bottom of the pit,
Mm.
the restaurant. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, that was kind of bizarre. Again, the devastation, and if you can picture this, and I know it's a horrible thing to think about, if you looked out, as I did, there was not 1 square yard of ground that did not have a piece of someone in it, a body part, something. I mean, again, when these buildings came down, they were purposely designed. I don't know if you know this, but I talked to the engineers afterwards. The way these buildings were designed was that they would implode, exactly what you saw. Where the floors come down one on another, okay? And that floor explodes, and then hits the next one, that explodes, and the next one. And I wondered, how could it do that? And the way they did it is they had steel cables every 2 feet embedded in the concrete floor and attached to the outer walls, the outer skin. There was no structural steel in the middle in any of those buildings. You would never see a partition or a bearing going up in the middle of them. It wasn't made that way. And that was on purpose. So if the tower ever came down, which no one would ever fathom, right? Couldn't happen. It would not affect the other one. And in actuality, it didn't. Had one tower been hit and came down, the other would have still stood. But they both got hit. Again, nobody figured that. There was a rumor that only one was insured, but I'm not sure of that. But the bottom line was everything was destroyed. I mean, typewriters were blown to pieces. There was nothing left to find. I've got a little piece of the 110th floor in my home that I keep in a case. But it was all gone. The pieces no bigger than that. And as we went down into the very, very bottom of what we affectionately called the pit, they said, "Man, you gotta see this." And I said, "Oh, not again." "Now what?" And he goes, "Here." And he opens up a door going in. There was a mall under there, a plaza where you could get breakfast and stuff like that. Opened the door, walked in. The tables were set. The orange juice was poured. The plates and the silverware was perfect on the tables. It was as if you walked into a whole different dimension with, Rod Serling in the Twilight Zone. Nothing was touched, nothing was moved, and yet it was right smack in the middle. I've never figured that one out. I'm not really sure. And there was nobody in there. That was the sad part. If somebody had been in there, they'd have survived.
How many
All
feet?
the places.
How many feet down was that? That was right at the bottom.
That was about 320 feet down into the pit. Yeah, it was way, way down. Yeah, the pit that they dug that went down, I mean, you'll see a flag coming out too, like a standard. It's an antenna actually with a fireman's outfit on it, fire outfit on it, hanging from it. That was the very first fireman we found. There was also a fireman on the path. There's a little pink blanket that you may see. Just lost my, there it is. And there was a fireman underneath that blanket. He had literally melted to the ground. I mean, melted. Badge, boots, everything. Now these are the things we witnessed. And the one thing that I really had to deal with, you can be trained to deal with this kind of stuff, but until you're there in that magnitude and you see it, you really don't know. But I really, really believe, I'm not the healthiest guy in the world. Before I went to 9/11, I had triple bypass and all this kind of stuff. So, I had to be careful. But the long and short of it is, I worked continuously. I never stopped. If I got 1 hour sleep a day, that was a lot. And usually was on the train going back and forth. And I never felt tired. I never hurt other than emotional.
but physically I never did. And I had to ask myself why, and what I truly believe is when you get in that kind of situation, that God reaches out and says, I will give you everything you need to do your job, but I won't let it destroy you. So I can look at these things, and I can see them, visualize them, but yet not be affected by it. I knew what I had to do. I think otherwise I would have just broken down and tears dropped to my knees, and it would have been over. They'd have sent me home. But it didn't happen that way. So it's amazing what you can do. You know, Bob was talking about the charity thing. I have to kind of laugh because I get a lot of credit for those things, but I work with the military a lot. When I started this charity, my son was over there fighting at the time. And he called me, middle of the night. Can I tell the story again? Hey, called me in the middle of the night, 3:15 in the morning, right? Now you get a call 3:15 in the morning as a parent. What do you think? There's a problem. Well, there was. He's calling from Iraq. He's 10 clicks north of Baghdad in the desert. And he's going, Dad, you got to do something. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm still in bed. What's up, Ronnie? And he goes, well, we're here and this is going on. We had a bad firefight, blah, blah. And he said, a lot of the kids were caught in the crossfire. And he said, we can't treat them. He said, there's nothing we can do. We can't handle pediatrics here. We can handle our own troops. You know that, right? And they're geared to do that. And even not on a large scale, because it was taking 2.5 hours to medevac out. They were losing a lot of their own people because they couldn't treat them right away. Didn't have the right supplies. And he said, you got to do something. And I said, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Well, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I got up, I went to my computer, and I started thinking, what could I do? Just one guy in the villages. And I said, well, I know the president of the hospital in the villages. I talked to him. He might have some ideas. So I set that up, did that the very next morning, and I walked in, told him what happened. And he said, you know, we got a lot of supplies here in this hospital. But he said, every hospital in Florida does. He said, we throw out 17 million pounds of brand new hospital equipment, bandages, syringe, everything, every single year in this state. And I said, that's nuts, it's wasteful. And he said, it's the law. The federal government and the state says we have to. Anything that's in a patient room, even if it isn't open, anything in an operating room, an ER, has to be disposed of. It cannot be given to anybody else. He said, the only way you can do that, he says, take all this stuff, disinfect it, sanitize it, and repackage it, and follow the protocol, hospital protocol. And I said, okay, I give up, what's that? And he gave me the protocol sheet. And I thought about it, and I said, no, we could do that. And I went to my Rotary Club, talked to about 120 people, told them the idea, go over to the hospital once, twice a week, get this stuff, clean it up, let's ship it overseas to our guys. And everybody said, yeah, great idea, let's do it. So we did exactly that. We started with 5 boxes sent from Fruitland Park Post Office. I remember taking them and giving them to the gal, and she said, gee, where are these going? And I said, the 528th Medical Battalion, located in Iraq. Here's the number, here's the information. You probably know the 528th is huge over there. And that's what I dealt with, because you had to send it to medical people. Okay, some of this stuff, this surgical instruments and stuff like that. So 5 boxes went out that day. That was the beginning. From that beginning, we opened 23 clinics on the front lines, okay, for operations base. 23 of them in Iraq and Afghanistan. We then built a 10-bed children's hospital in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, after the Taliban blew it to hell. And we built a brand new one. Now, I didn't do that. I had the idea, I can get the equipment. I had 17 hospitals working with me then. So I was getting truckloads of this stuff. I got a contract with the Air Force. I called the State Department, gave me carte blanche wherever I wanted to go. So we were flying stuff out of MacDill constantly, filling C-130s, and off we went to Germany. From there, I would either go to Iraq or Afghanistan. We had quite a production line going for a little group here in the villages, probably 2 or 3 of us working on it. And that was it. And we just kept it going for years. And I remember the last thing we did, I got a call from Colonel Steve, who was in charge of all the medical people, both Afghanistan and Iraq. And he said, 9 villages have been attacked by the Taliban. They know who you guys are. We had just delivered supplies there. And we got water from them. As a result of that, the Taliban attacked them. They killed all their livestock. They burned everything they had. They destroyed their homes. They took all of the women, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to gross you out, but this is the reality of the Taliban. They gathered all the young women who were still breastfeeding their children, which is what they do there. Okay? And they mutilated every one of them, so they could no longer feed their children. The children would die, and that's what they wanted. Some of the children, when the parents would cooperate, or they knew the parents helped the Americans, took their children and they threw them on an open fire. One child was burned over 85% of his body, charred black. I have the photographs. And we went in there knowing these kids were gonna die. And I called Gerber, just a, pardon the expression, balls out move. I called the head of Gerber and I finally got through to somebody with some clout. And I said, I need baby bottles and I need them right now. I need pallet loads. And they're like, what are you, nuts? And I explained it to them. And they said, you know what, we might be able to do that. And sure enough, they sent me like 4 pallet loads of Gerber baby bottles, thousands and thousands. Then I went to Sam's Club and I got infant formula could be mixed with water, because water is available, nothing else is. And I ended up with 4 pallet loads of that. All of that went down to McDill, got shipped out, was delivered within, I think, 6 days, 5, 6 days. Meanwhile, they kept going on what they had. And we were able to take care of that. So it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it. And you're not afraid to step out in faith. And that's exactly what SOS has been doing ever since. We now have gone from 1,200 homeless veterans down to 324. We may not change that, but we're trying. And the best thing about you mentioned it, and I'm so proud of this, being out there in the forest, I get to see a lot of the kids. And they don't have the Xboxes, they don't have the bebop machines and all that garbage. My grandson sits in front of them and plays 28 hours a day if he could. They read books. They play games at night around the fire with their parents. They play cards. They don't have electricity. Gotta do something. These are good, smart kids, very smart. And to them, education is a privilege. And the more I talked to them, the more I saw how bright they really were and this talent wasn't being tapped. So we would talk about it, and they'd talk about college, and they'd say, oh, yeah, great, but nothing I'm ever gonna be able to do. And I said, yeah, I bet we can. So I cut a deal with a group, which you probably know, called Take Stock of Children. They do a very nice job. What they do is they provide a 2-year education for a child to any school they wanna go to in the state of Florida. Any college, any university, has to be state. Then the state will match dollar for dollar whatever you collect. Then they will reduce the tuition depending which school you pick. So these kids can go to school. So I started a program asking people if they would donate $4,000, whether it's a group or whatever could raise that. And if they can, that will turn into 8. That will be invested during their 4 years of high school. And they have to keep their grades up. They have to have a 3.0. Not easy, and they do. And then when they graduate, they will get a certificate saying, you're going to college, and here's where you're going. Because that's the one place you want to go. We now have 51 children who are in college. 51. And 4 of them are from the Eagles, right? Eagles do that and a lot of other groups. So that's the fun of this thing.
You know, we're kind of gonna be running out of time.
Yeah.
I know, you gotta get, you know, you got to get together, you're worse than me. It's pretty hard. But, I'd like to open it up to any questions. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Yes, sir.
You talked about, when you talked about those students that didn't have the badges to get in, who was the organization, or who was it? You mentioned you talked to somebody, but what?
Oh, initially I called my own because I was with the National Red Cross out of Washington and they couldn't do it. Okay. So then I turned to my associate who sat next to me in the bunker up in Albany, the guy I called Major Minor. He was with the Salvation Army.
Oh, Salvation
Oh,
Army.
yeah. And I'll tell you what, God bless the Salvation Army. They are great. They are great. There is nothing they will not do and they will never take a penny. Not a penny.
I have a short story. We lived out in Albuquerque at the time of 9/11. And one of the churches out there was, they had a plan to, I don't know how many wristbands. My other half has a wristband on that honors, who, Frank?
Joseph Navas, who was a Port Authority.
Okay.
His bracelet hasn't been off my wrist
Port Authority doesn't get a lot of recognition, but boy, they
He's
do.
never taken it off.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that.
You know, I want to share a little something too. I know we got one in the back. Oh, lovely Rita.
Yes. I know, Rita.
There's another lady who does a lot.
I'm gonna lean on someone too old to stand, sorry.
No, I wanted to ask about the flag that's up there. I had never seen that before.
The what?
The flag behind the heroes. Flag of heroes.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Go ahead, tell
Tell us about it.
Well, it's not mine, it's not mine.
It's mine, it's mine.
It's Bobby's, but the flag arrows lists all the names of those
Yeah,
who lost their lives that day on 9/11, and there were many.
that's been hanging on my wall in
Yeah.
my house, ever since I moved in there. So, and it's gonna go right back up on that wall.
Actually, if you would like to have something like that at the 9/11 Memorial in New York, they have those there also, and it's a donation to get that. Along with a lot of other wonderful things. If you've never gone to New York and seen it, go. It is phenomenal. And anybody who was ever there who did anything on 9/11, you go to a computer, you type in their name, and the whole history comes up. Tells you everything they did, their pictures, all that kind of stuff. I was amazed how much they had in there. Somebody must have been following me. It wasn't my stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to share, I mean, we all of us here will remember it one way or another. I would hope that there would be some more younger people here today, because it happened 18 years ago. You know, and those 18, 19-year-olds, 16, 15, they have no idea. They think 911 is the emergency call. 911 is 911. So that's one of the reasons we did this here. So when you go take it back and you talk to your kids about it, so they know that they'll never forget. And if you see this wristwatch I'm wearing, I don't normally wear a watch. I was in San Francisco with my lovely wife on vacation. I put her on a plane on the 9th, sent her home. I went to a convention on the 10th. Lee Greenwood sang God Bless the USA live. And it was like, wow, it's going to be a great convention. The next morning I woke up. On the 10th, I bought this watch. And it does say September 11th, 2001. San Francisco, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I woke up, turned the TV on, I saw this Chinese writing. And I'm thinking, well, you know, San Francisco, Chinatown, right? Hey, I'll change the channel. That kind of looks like a trade center, it looks like a plane. I can't read. So I changed it, yeah. I saw the second one hit. That day we went to the convention and we couldn't get anything done. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. In New York, the IBEW, there was a young man just started that day, and he was killed that day. So that was local one, the IBEW. And like I said, there wasn't any dry eyes in the place. But then out of the back of the room, and I get choked up when I say this, all of a sudden we heard from the back of the room, we Canadians want to sing God Bless America with our American brothers. God, I still think of that. You know, we all have our memories, and we all, I look at it this way. If you saw a teardrop fall into the pond and the ripples it does, September 11th, the ground, the plane, the Pentagon, those were the teardrop that came down. The ripple effects that's still going on. There's a lot of firemen, police, EMS, people who lost their sons, their brothers, and daughters. That still goes on. So we can never forget that. You know, and I'm very happy to have been part of this, Gary.